Okay, in this video, I'm going to demonstrate how to import data into R from CSV files. Working with R can be very confusing for those who are used to working with data sets that are maintained within more traditional file formats and where analyses are driven by drop-down menus and some fairly basic syntax. One of the major challenges new learners of R face is clearing the hurdle of its technical jargon and also to a certain extent the programming. The purpose of this demonstration is to show you how to import data into R from CSV files and to a lesser extent Excel and SPSS files using language that hopefully learners are more familiar with. So before getting started, it's very important that you develop a basic concept that's called a data object. So within R, a data object can refer to a variety of things. For instance, the data that you import from another program or file format will be housed in a data object. And that data object is most likely going to be a data frame. A data frame is laid out pretty much in the same way as data within an Excel file or SPSS or Stata file or some other spreadsheet, as it contains variables and values on those variables. To be able to operate on the variables that are included within that object, you often will be required to explicitly refer to the data frame containing your variables as well as the specific variables that you're analyzing. On the other hand, it is possible to save data objects that contain information from previous analyses that can also be used in subsequent as inputs in subsequent analyses. And then data objects can also contain information regarding computations and so forth. So for the current demonstrations, we're going to be focusing on the use of data frames as they pertain to imported data, where the file types are CSV, or comma-separated files that have comma-separated values. I'll also provide a short demo of how to convert Excel files and SPSS files into CSV files that could then be imported into R using the approach that I demonstrate throughout much of this video. There are other user-written packages that would allow you to bypass this approach, but this is another viable option if this is something that you want to do. So to get started, first, what you're going to want to do when you import your data into R is you'll want to save it in a data object that's called a data frame. And as noted previously, a data frame is an object where the data on your variables appear as column vectors with an appearance that's pretty much the same as what you would have in your original file format, such as Excel or SPSS. So data frames assume that column vectors are all the same length, but they don't require your variables to have the same measurement characteristics, which would be the case if you're working with an array, which is another type of data object. Your variables can be treated essentially as numeric or character, and in common usage, numeric variables are those that are generally going to be treated as falling at an interval or ratio scale of measurement. And character variables, on the other hand, are treated as analogous to string variables. However, within R, the program also treats character variables as factors within the context of certain analyses. So it is important that you take into account whether you're working with a numeric or character/factor variable when running your analyses in R. So as I said before, R has the capacity to read a CSV file that contains your data set directly in. And what I have right here, this is this is a data set that we're going to be working from. And I have this data, this is opened up in Excel, but this is basically a CSV file. And I'll show you really quickly. Basically, this is the file right here. It is housed on my desktop in a folder that's REX. Basically, this is the folder name right here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually import this file into R. So first off, we need to open up the R program. So I'm just going to go in here and locate R and open it up. So you can see we have our little console here. And so the first thing to note when it comes to importing your data is that you have to, basically R is always pointed at a folder, or at a directory on your computer or on a particular drive. So it's always pointed to some type of directory. And what you're going to want to do is to essentially point R to the directory that contains the data set that you are trying to import and ultimately work with. So remember what I just said, that basically, R kind of defaults with a certain directory. And so what I want to do first off is I want to get an idea about what directory it's pointed to. So I can start off with a fairly basic command, which is type in get and then wd, and then the open parenthesis here. So get wd, open parenthesis, and when I hit enter, you'll notice that what it says is that the R is pointed at my C drive, basically to the folder's documents that's on that C drive. So this is the path right here to that folder right there. So at any rate, I don't want it to go there though, because where I want to point it to is the folder on my desktop that contains the CSV file that I want to work from. So what I'm going to do in this case is I'm going to type in set, let's see here, oops, there we go, set wd, and then in this particular case, I'm going to type in quotation marks, C, which is my drive, and then I'm going to use these backslashes here. So you'll notice that a lot of times, like when you are looking at files, on your computer, like if I go under properties right here, you'll see you'll see this is the name of the file, and then this is the path to that file, and you'll see that you have the backslashes here. And what we are going to be using instead are forward slashes. So don't forget that. So we'll type in. I'm just going to type in the path, which is users, I'm going to type in my name here, backslash desktop, backslash R, and then EX right here, and then in quotation marks, and then in parenthesis. So just keep in mind that basically we're setting our drive to setting R to point to essentially this folder, the REX that's on my C drive and on my desktop. So at this point, what I'll do is I'll hit enter, and then basically it's now set. So now if I type in get wd and then parenthesis here, you'll see it's pointed where it should be going. So you can see this is the before and this is the after. So we're pointing to the correct folder on my desktop. Another option, if you don't want to use syntax to do this, and you want to, maybe you're having a little hard time, typing in and having it all be correct. A little easier way of pointing the R program is just to go to File, go to Change Directory right here, and you can see I've just got my desktop listed right here, but it works with any drive or whatever. Then the REX right here, click on OK, and it would do the same thing. So in both cases, it's pointing to the same directory. So now what I want to do is I want to essentially call the data or read the CSV file in. And what this entails is to create a new data object, which is basically going to be my data frame. So to do this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to just type in my data here and then an arrow. So there's basically looks like this. And then basically I'm just going to type in read period CSV. And then inside the parenthesis, I'm going to type in, now I need to make sure that I include quotation marks. I'm going to type the name of the file. So the name of the file is LR and DA examples sub 1, and I've got spaces in between, so I have to make sure I've got that in there as well. So I'm going to type in LR and DA examples, then sub 1, and then period, and then CSV. So don't forget your file extension, and then end quotation marks. Now also what I want to do is I'm going to type in a comma here because I also have in my data set I've got row 1 right here contains my variable names. So that in column A right here it's ID, that's just a person identifier. Column B through the remainder are different variables that might be included in analysis. But I need to let the program know that we have headers in this first row. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to type in header equals T, or I could type in header equals true, and then basically in parentheses here, and then hit enter. All right, so now what I can do is I can, if I want to look at the data, I can just type in my data and then hit enter, and so now you can see the data set. So it's quite a bit. You can also see that there are a couple of missing values in there, and so that's where the NAs are coming from. So the main point or a point that I want to mention is that the name my data, this was an arbitrary name. So essentially what we're doing is we're importing this portion or this file, the CSV file, into R, and it's being essentially converted into a data object called my data. And so I could have named this anything. I could have, capitalized my data or whatever. It wouldn't matter. But that's essentially what's happened. So when I type in the data object name, it's going to give me the information on that data object. So this is my data frame right here. If I want to look at the characteristics of the data object, then what I can do is I can type in str, and then in this case I'm going to type in the name, which is my data, inside parenthesis, and you can see right here that it's giving me information about the individual variables. So these are all the variables, and you can see right here these variables are all being treated as integers, and these are being treated as numeric, and then this last one is being treated as an integer as well. So that's how it was imported and structured. So another option, if I want to look at the data a little bit more closely, or if I need to change values or something like that, or change characteristics, I could also go into data editor right here, and where it says name of data frame or matrix, I'll just type in my data and then hit OK. And you can see we have a little spreadsheet right here with our variable names included, and the data on those variables. I do want to point out that when R is importing data from a CSV file, the first column, the first variable in the data set, the name is going to kind of appear like this right here. So you can see it's not exactly the same as the original variable name. And it looks like it basically treats whatever the first variable is as an identifier. So for instance, if this variable had not been in here, then you would have sort of the same situation with the donate variable. So the reason why I actually created the ID variable in here was to highlight this particular point. But I could change this if I want. If I click on the column header right here, you'll see first off, we have the variable name as it's presented. Then you have variable type, and it says numeric and character right here. So if I don't want to change anything related to that, I could still change the name just by kind of removing this, and hit the little X right here. And if I close it out, you can see down and below it just says fix my data, and it's basically now fixed that component. So I can just basically type in str, and we'll type it in again. Oops. str, and then my data. And so now you can see that the first variable, the ID variable, is now showing up as it was before. We also see that it looks like some of the characteristics of the other variables have changed as well. So if you want to change those back or whatever, you can just simply go in here, and you can see under each of these, it looks like it made a little bit of a change to make all of these numeric. But if you wanted to change them to like a character variable or something like that, you could just click on that, and it would, it'll basically fix that again. And so if I type in str and then my data, you can see that now the right variable right here is now being converted to a character variable. So so you can kind of change some of the characteristics of the variables if you go under the essentially the data editor option. But also you can there are times like when you're running your analyses, certain analyses require a little bit more explicit definition of the variables as a factor or numeric or integer or character. And so if you want to make changes in those kinds of ways to the data object, or basically our data frame, or variables within the data frame, we can do that using the as factor, or as numeric, or as integer, or as character functions. So I'm going to show you a little bit about how you can do that. So at this point, what we'll do is we'll type in, I'm going to use the first variable. The first variable in the data set is donate. So right now, it's actually listed as numeric. But let's say I want to convert the donate variable into a factor. What I could do is I could type in my data, which is the data frame name, and then a $sign, and then I'm going to type in donate. Now make sure that R does differentiate between upper and lower case, or does not or does differentiate between upper and lower case variables. So you have to have essentially the variable typed in exactly as it's showing up in the data set. So now what I'll do is I'll type in my little arrow here, and then I'll type in as period factor, and then inside the parenthesis I'll type in my data, and then $sign again, and then we'll do donate. So basically what's happening is that R is now essentially it's going to adjust the original data frame with this called my data with the donate variable, and essentially kind of coerce, I guess you could say, the donate variable into being a factor. So what we'll do in this case is I will just hit enter, and so now when I type in str, then my data right here, you'll see that now the donate variable shows up as a factor. And so and this can be useful in certain types of analyses that require a variable to be treated as a factor. By the same token, let's say we wanted to convert it back to a numeric variable. We can certainly do that. So we would just type in my data, again the $sign donate, and then type our little arrow in, and then as numeric, and then my data $sign donate, and then we can take a look at it. And so now you can see that the donate variable has been converted or coerced again into being treated as a numeric variable. Let's say we want to treat it as an integer, kind of go back to what we originally started off with. To do that, we can just basically, let me get that off, we can basically we'll just go back to my data, $sign donate, my little arrow here, and then I'll say as integer. And then we'll type in the my data, that's my data object again, with donate included, separated by the $sign. And then when we take a look at it, you can see that now the variable is being treated as an integer right here. Now let's convert it into a character variable. So to do that, we'll type in my data donate as character, my data, and $sign, and then donate again. And so now when we take a look at it, you can see that it's been coerced into, or being treated as a character variable instead of what we just had before. So this can be really handy. As I said, after you get the data into R, you're going to have to really pay attention and make sure that when you're running various analyses that the characteristics of your variable match what's required in your data analyses. So it's really picking. So you have to be very explicit about what type of variables that you're working with when you're running analyses in R. So at any rate, this is just a way in which you can kind of easily go back and forth and convert variables to different types as you're getting ready to run various analyses. So at any rate, the last little piece that I wanted to show you was, or one thing that I kind of mentioned is that you can import data from SPSS or Excel, like an Excel file, into R. But oftentimes, there are packages that allow you to do this. But a fairly simple way of doing this is also just to export the data from like a SAV file or whatever, or a Stata file if you have Stata, into a CSV file, and then use that to import using the same procedures that I've just shown you. So just to give you an example with SPSS, I can just go to File, Export right here, and then you can see right here it says CSV data. So if I click on that, you'll see that the options are, and this is basically the data that I had in the other file format, the CSV format. But in this case, it's in SPSS. So if I go down here, I'll type in, there's the name that I want to save it as, .csv right here. You can see down here it says comma delimited right here. And then, if I want to make sure that the variable names are written into that CSV file, I'll definitely want to click on this right here. If it's a case where I have a variable with value labels included and I want to use the value labels instead of the actual data values, like for instance donate right here, it's coded 0 and 1. 0 was do not intend to donate, 1 is an intention to donate. So if I wanted to use the labels, which is laid out under my variable view box, so it being do not intend versus do intend, then I could click on this little box right here. So, but in this case, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to basically stick with the values that are presented in the data set. And so then I would just click on save. And so in this case, I'm just kind of resaving over the previous CSV file. But so it's now in there, and this is it right here. So I've just kind of resaved over that right here. So also, if I have it, my Excel file, so if I, let's see if I can open up just an Excel file. Okay, there it is. So in this, right now it's in XLSX format. So now if I could just save this into a CSV file format, I can just go to Save As. And so you can see right here it says Excel Workbook XLSX. And so I can just basically click this little button, go down to CSV, and then click on Save. And it's basically saying, do you want to, in this case, do you want to replace the existing file? And so I did. And so then basically I still have the same file that I had before, which is this one, the CSV file. And so then I can just basically import from that. So at any rate, like I said, this was just kind of hopefully a quick and dirty overview of some strategies that you could use in order to import data into the R program.